Welcome everyone to the call. I'm Candace Davis, Network Community Manager for Swipe Out Hunger. And if this is your first time at a swipe session, welcome. Thank you for being here. We're waiting for just one more speaker to join us, but in the meantime, we'll go ahead and start jumping into what you can expect from today's swipe session. We're so grateful to be joined by several panelists who you'll hear from. We'll be talking about first generation students, their experience, celebrating their experience, and how we can support them in our campus pantries or on our campuses with any other programming. So for today's agenda, you're going to hear a welcome from TIAA. We'll be hosting again our guest panel, and they'll have an opportunity to introduce themselves. We'll be also giving y'all a chance to ask some questions, go through a Q&A. And then also you'll hear from one of my peers, Sage, who is releasing a resource guide, all focused on first generation students. We'll also be sharing some student resources. We know we have students on today's call, and we'll be sharing student resources that y'all can dive in deeper with our network, and then talk about what to expect from Swipe Out Hunger moving forward. And sorry, y'all, Ambika is a little bit delayed with us getting her on the call. And she is here. Perfect. Thank you all so much. I'm going to add her. Thanks for your patience. And Ambika, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you everyone, and thank you so much for your patience.
Oh, I'm so happy I got in. Hi, everyone. It is such an honor to be here on behalf of TIAA. We are thrilled and so grateful at this opportunity to partner with Swipe Out Hunger to support the success of first generation students. Many of us at TIAA and Nuveen are first generation students, so this is a initiative that is very, very near and dear to our heart. Our goal is that this partnership will continue to remove the stigma surrounding food insecurity and really encourage first-gen students to take advantage of all of the available resources and inspire other organizations and corporations around us to join us in breaking down those barriers to first-generation success. We know that today over 50% of college students are first gen, and we know that this is the group most likely to experience more food insecurity compared to their peers. And this leads to difficult outcomes, reduced graduation rates, which then have financial implications. And so as a financial services company, as a retirement company, we are looking far down the line to ensure that first generation students today have the opportunity to retire with security and dignity in the years to come. And we know that these students today, those who do attend college and complete college, have 63% more in their retirement accounts. So this goes beyond just today. This goes beyond just making sure everybody is fed and taken care of in the present, and really has implications for financial equity far into the future. And many of these first gen students are unfamiliar with available campus resources or where to access help. And so we really want to help highlight that need for proactive outreach and awareness building. So Our hope in this partnership and this event is to raise that awareness, offer practical solutions on our higher ed campuses, and ultimately for all of us to join together in supporting our first generation students.
Thank you so much, Amika, and thank you to TIAA. We're so grateful for your partnership and your sponsorship of this opportunity for us to bring this insight to our network. We know how much everyone's going to benefit today from this conversation. Now moving into the panel conversation, which we're so grateful for those who are joining us today. Everyone will have an opportunity to introduce themselves, but I just briefly want to share with you who's here today. Kimberly Jones, the president for the Council for Opportunity Education, has joined us. Dina Stratford, who is the vice president of Field Development Engagement for First Gen Forward. Dan Garcia, someone from our network at the University of St. Thomas. He's the director of the Rising Stars program. And Cassie Jones, a student at Arkansas State University Mountain Home, who is so grateful to share her lived experience today as a first generation student. So welcome. Thank you all so much for being here. And we're going to go ahead, if everyone wants to take the opportunity to introduce us a little bit to you and what brings you to this topic. And we'll start with Kim.
Good afternoon or good morning for some people. As mentioned, I'm Kim Jones. I'm president of the Council for Opportunity in Education, and we represent the interests of students served by the federal TRIO programs. And as such, they are by definition, first generation to college from low income backgrounds, as well as students with disabilities, veterans, and other different student populations. But so I was in the chat asking who here is TRIO? And so TRIO, even though the name would suggest three, there are in fact 7 federally funded programs that support students from as young as the 6th grade all the way through adult ed. And our college focused programs are Student Support Services, which is for undergraduate retention and completion, and the McNair Scholars Program, which is to help students on their career path toward graduate education. And so we have over 875,000 TRIO students. We have over 6 million TRIO alumni. So very honored to be joining y'all in this conversation today.
Thank you so much, Kim. And Dina, if you want to take it away.
Thank you, Candace. Hi, you all. My name is Dina Waintrobe Stafford, a she, her pronouns. And as Candace shared, I serve as the Vice President for Field Development and Engagement with First Gen Forward, formerly the Center for First Generation Student Success. In my role, I create, scale, and deliver virtual, like this offering today, and in-person professional development opportunities to the 400 plus institutions within our First Gen Forward network and thousands of institutions beyond. I also lead our workforce development focus. And First Gen Forward, if you're unfamiliar, we're an organization and our focus is to dramatically change the success landscape of first generation students and professionals. There are over 54% of undergraduates and graduate students who identify as first gen. And so the current college going student is overwhelmingly first gen. And it's our responsibility to equip colleges and universities with the necessary tools and support offerings to support their first gen student population. Thank you for having me on the panel.
Thank you. And Dan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Candace. Hey, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon. My name is Dan Garcia. I am the first in my bloodline to ever go to college and graduate. So first gen all the way. And so currently I run first generation initiatives on campus, including our Title V grant, my Rising Stars program, the food pantry on campus, and very supportive of TRIO programs. I spent 20 years working with TRIO before moving to St. Thomas. And so we like to put together the support programs that these students need for success. And so I'm very happy to be here and discuss some of the initiatives and how we can move forward to making, what I say, first gen, best gen all the way. So pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much, Dan. And last but certainly not least, Cassie, would you like to introduce everyone to yourself?
Hey y'all, my name is Cassie Jones. I use she, her pronouns. I am a full-time nurse, part-time food banker, and a full-time first-generation student. I wear a lot of different hats in the food security and public health space, but I've been working in food security for about 3 years. I'm proud to be on So About Hunger's Student Leadership and Advisory Council. And yeah, I'm here to talk today about what it's like to live as a first-gen student.
Thank you so much, Cassie. So if we want to just start with setting the stage a bit, I'll pass it to Kim, but could you start by providing a little bit more context for everyone in a working definition of a first-gen student so that we're all talking about the same student?
Sure. So when I say this, I recognize that our community's definition of first gen might be different than some other institutions. But according to the Higher Education Act, and the definition of a first generation student is someone whose parents, whether they're two-parent household or if it's a single parent household, whomever's raising them, that parent does not have a bachelor's degree. And so that's how our community defines first generation. I know that in other venues, they might include associate's degree. Sometimes they factor in their citizenship status in that as well. But our general definition, again, going back to the Higher Education Act of 1965, defines first generation of college as someone whose parents do not have a bachelor's degree.
Thank you so much. Next, we'll pass it to Dina. What specific challenges do you all see with first generation students what are they facing in today's higher education landscape?
Yeah, so going off of what Kim shared and recognizing the definition, and every institution may very well take a nuanced approach to the definition, and that's entirely appropriate, recognizing student population, particularly international students or maybe undocumented or DACA students, recognizing that we're all coming into space from various backgrounds. But to the point of the first gen definition, as I shared previously, over half of all college going students identify as first gen. The completion rates between first and continuing gen students differ significantly. 20% first gen, 49% for continuing gen. And so students are often entering environments that are unprepared to support them. We like to reference the good work of Dr. TIAA Brown-McNair, Dr. Susan Alberton, Dr. Nicole McDonald, Thomas Major Jr., and Dr. Michelle Asha Cooper, who authored the first and second edition of Becoming a Student-Ready College, which outlines the need to confront the college-ready mindset, pointing the responsibility at students, particularly first-generation students, to be ready for an environment that was not built for them. It wasn't built with them in mind. And this continues to serve a significant barrier for first-gen students, where these conversations for continuing gen students are not as new. Contributing barriers in accessing information about the admission process, understanding how and when to register for courses, connecting with an academic advisor. What is an academic advisor? Understanding course requirements, and course requirements to degree completion, affording tuition, fees, room, board. The list goes on, and these are known as hidden curriculum. And these barriers accumulate and often feel insurmountable. And it's important to note that these barriers are being placed in front of first-gen students. And it's incumbent on institutions to confront those barriers and to dismantle them to promote access and success. Additionally, from an income perspective, the median parent income of first-gen students in 2016 and 2020 was $41,000. Whereas for continuing generation students in 2060, it was $90,000, and in 2020 was $103,000. Both first-generation students and continuing generation students work, though the difference of hours between first gen and continuing gen students is 20 hours for first gen and 12 hours for continuing gen. So as we're considering the various competing priorities and responsibilities that first generation students possess, it is sizable compared to continuing gen students. In thinking about access to and paying for food, 12% of first generation students had difficulty in accessing and paying for food, compared to 7% of continuing gen students. And these data points I'm referencing from fact sheets that First Gen Forward has released over the years. And Candace, I can share these links with you. But all of these factors and many others contribute to the barriers today's first gen students face. And it demonstrates the difference between experience of first generation and continuing generation students. So how do we make improvements? Well, we take the time to audit and confront the barriers, which is what the First Gen Forward Network is actively doing. It's comprised of over 400 colleges and universities across 49 states. And these institutions are working toward a student-ready mindset through first generation student success.
Wow. Thank you so much for providing so much context around the experience of the first generation student. I think so often we hear what a traditional college student looks like, and we know there is no traditional college student anymore, right? And there's so many barriers that all of our students are facing, but especially first gen students. Interested to hear from Cassie's perspective as a first generation student yourself. What does that identity mean to you? And maybe if you're comfortable sharing about some of the experiences that you've had.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I love all that information that was just presented. I feel like I identify with that so personally. Talking about the hour requirement, especially as like I'm working bare minimum 50 hours a week while going to school full time. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize. So that our first generation students do. But to me, I identify being first gen as being someone who is creative, someone who is inventive and dedicated and passionate, who kind of at the end of the day has a lot of grit. I honestly didn't realize that I identified as a first gen student until I started college and saw the scholarships that I qualified for. And I think that's a pretty common experience. I also had a unique journey in high school. Being a disabled student, I was homeschooled. The first time I ever went to public school was when I started college. Being homeschooled definitely helped me develop like the computer skills and being comfortable with online classes that later helped me in college. But it also felt in some ways, along with being first gen, like it was a double disadvantage and a double isolator. I felt like such a fringe part of the out crowd. Um, I knew I wanted to go to college from an early age. I was lucky that my family was super supportive of my journey, but I do remember being about 13 and thinking about college and figuring out what I wanted to do next. I remember going to my parents and asking for help, figuring it all out. And, I remember them kind of pausing and saying, Cassie, we never got this far. We want to help, but we don't know how this works either. And that's a pretty sobering conversation to have when you're still a brand new teenager. It's like, oh, yeah, I am on my own in this. Okay. So to cope with that, I spent so long researching. I cannot tell you the hours I spent online learning about college admissions and different universities and how the process worked. Instead of being a kid and going out and hanging with my friends, I was up at 4 a.m., unable to go back to sleep, scrolling on Harvard's or the ACT's or the College Board's website. And that's something that I still have a hard time admitting to this day, how devoted I was to this, because I got a lot of people laughing at me or some weird looks when I talked about it. But I had another first generation student say that you have to be prepared to work hard, to sacrifice, and that was definitely my experience. It did pay off in the long run, but I was also left with this really empty feeling of wishing and knowing that it didn't have to be this difficult. Kids shouldn't be spending their summer break at 15 years old becoming an expert on the financial aid system. I know of other people who have taken a full gap year just to figure out the college admissions and financial system. That level of determination and the amount of time I spent also really isolated me from my peers. I had a lot of friends who didn't understand why I worked so hard. I got a lot of comments from adults about maybe being stuck up or trying too hard. But in reality, I saw from a young age what poverty did to my family, what struggling to live paycheck to paycheck was like. We wanted a better future, and I'm not bitter about what I had to go through, but it does make me really passionate and determined to make that system better for others.
Cassie, thank you so much for sharing your experience and your journey. You kind of hit on this a bit about the misconceptions of the first generation student that we might have, and even what you experienced of, what your intentions were with some of these efforts that you were making to make this dream a reality. To the whole panel, what other misconceptions do you think are out there potentially for first-generation students that they're combating once they get on campus or even within their own families or communities?
Um, I'll start. I think one misconception from the outside looking in is education equity, where faculty, staff at institutions of higher education think all students are equal. And academically, they may be equal, but systemically and resource-wise, all students are not equal. And to be able to acknowledge that, just as an example, we have students here that have all the resources in the world, and then students out of my program, it's one laptop being shared amongst 5 or 6 brothers and sisters. That's not equity. And so to treat students that they're all equal on the same level is damaging to students that don't have all those resources. So I think the misconception is that, you've got into this university, you're you're on level with everyone else, and that's far from the truth.
Thank you, Dan.
I would add to that, and again, I really applaud Cassie for sharing her experience, and thank you for illuminating what I think is not so much a misconception, but just a lack of awareness that when you're first gen, you are first gen in a lot of things, not just being a student in college, but very often our first gen students go on to become the first gen in their family to buy a home. They become the first gen to work in an office. They're constantly crossing barriers, and very often they don't have the support. Not that their family doesn't support them emotionally, but there's no one to kind of call and say, hey, how do I do this? How did you do this? And so because very often our first gen students don't know what they don't know, creating support systems amongst other first gen students, first gen alumni, who could just kind of hold people's hands as they're on their journeys.
Thank you
Kim, I
so much.
appreciate you. Oh, sorry, Candace. Kim, I appreciate you touching on those points because you're right. Families and communities of first-gen students are incredibly supportive. They back them. They're so proud of them. We had some amazing quotes out of the 2018 landscape report where first-gen students were reporting about how proud their families were and how proudful they felt too, to represent not only themselves, not only their family, but a generation. And in thinking about what institutions can do to confront that is to reimagine the way their parents and families offices connect with the parents and families and communities of first gen students and adjust the approaches they take when they invite parents and families to their institution. VCU has done this amazing job of creating a virtual course where they invite parents and families to engage, and it's free so they can learn about the academic calendar. How amazing would it be to be able to say, like, yes, I have these midterms coming up, and your parents and family have a concept of that because they've been invited into your education journey. And not having the burden being constantly on the first gen students to take the lead, but the responsibility of the institution to consider 360 degrees. Richard Bland College of William and Mary hosted a graduation celebration and incorporated parents and families of first-gen students, which enabled, again, their community to be a part of the experience. The only other thing I'll add is that the first-gen identity is so multifaceted. And it's important for us to consider that identities can be whole and can be can be more visible based on the environments that you're in, but you only know them unless you disclose them, and you have to self-disclose, self-identify. So it's important that institutions and other entities are taking the opportunity to not conflate identities and to recognize that first-gen students come from so many different backgrounds and have so many other identities, and it's not just one. And so harnessing that is really important too.
And if I could add one thing, I had to raise my hand because I said, if I don't, I'm going to forget. Dina's comments reminded me, I do think there's a lot of noise, whether it's social media or otherwise, saying that people don't value college anymore. And our first gen students know exactly what they're doing, and they know it's a tough road to go, but they're excited about the journey. And I wanted to share, and I'll plop this in the chat. COE's research arm, the Pell Institute, just released a report where they did an investigative study asking students of color from first gen backgrounds what whether college would matter to them. Like, is it worth it? And resoundingly, the answer was yes. And it's a really, really beautiful report that illuminates a lot of misconceptions around first-gen students and first-gen students of color.
Thank you for adding that resource in the chat. I'm glad to know that resources like this are existing for folks to change the conversation, because we know that's so common, and our students are on TikTok and that's the voice that they're hearing. So we want to make sure that they're hearing all well-rounded opinions and perspectives. We started dabbling in this about what we can do to show up for our students and the support systems that exist for them. And so I'm going to turn to Dan here, because we know he's on campus and he's been running a lot of different programs in his time. Dan, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about programs that you see working on your campus and things that you hope to implement if you haven't already.
Sure, absolutely. What we're trying to build on campus is a welcoming space for students, particularly first generation students. One of the keys to making these a success is from the start, normalize asking for help. Students don't, especially students with marginalized backgrounds whose families have built their family on hard work and determination, but it's regarded as you're struggling if you have to ask for help, or it's a shameful thing. And so normalizing that people are there to support you and using that help is a big deal. And so my program is made up of 250 first generation and or Pell eligible students. And so one of the things we found when I started this program is that these students are looking for community, a space to call the community. And so right now, our office is this giant house on campus that used to be part of the neighborhood. But I strategically asked for this space because it's a home. And I have 30 to 40 students on a regular basis in this house. I have one side for studying, one side for just hanging out. And they're here all the time. And to hear these conversations like, oh, you're going through this struggle as well? And how do we do that? And they're forming these amazing groups that are going out and doing these amazing things on campus. The other thing is that I know my students academically are successful. They can do it. The coursework at the school is rigorous and there's a lot they have to do. What I'm trying to do and what my team tries to do is to eliminate these barriers. So monthly support meetings. We went out and we brought the food pantry into the garage of our house. So now it's not shameful for them to go to an open space and ask for food. They come to the house, they're hanging out. Oh, by the way, you could take 60 pounds of food home every month. And at first I was like, I don't know if it's going to be used. In the first month and a half, we gave away 4,000 pounds of food. 4,000. That's saying how much food insecurity is prevalent on campus, but no one wants to talk about it because there's a shame associated with it. And so we're normalizing all of this. And, I have a connection with our undocumented students, because undocumented students, they're also first generation and they need support services. But undocumented students don't have the same voice as students that are citizens here. So how do you be their voice for them? And so it's putting all these little programs and systems together to remove those obstacles, and they thrive academically. My last year, my retention rate from freshman to sophomore year was 98%. That's unheard of in a university setting, but it was because they had this community where they can rely on each other. 250 students, I have maybe 100 of them that come to me regularly. But the other 150, they know they have this safety net where they can go out and thrive and be leaders and be bold because they know there are people there to support them. And so I think setting up, understanding what the barriers are and finding solutions for those barriers, it helps these students thrive. And so, in the climate now that we are politically, I have a lot of concerns, or my undocumented students have a lot of concerns. So we're going out and finding immigration lawyers to come sit in our office and talk with students to reassure them, you belong here, you're safe here. And so, and then the other thing I do on campus, and it's all about identity. I don't allow people to refer to my students as low-income students. I tell my students, you are not identified by your value, by your wealth. I was like, if anyone asks, you're a Pell eligible student. Half the people won't know what that means, but we know what that means. And so if we put that ambition in them and don't let them be identified as poor, they thrive. And so what we've been doing is working, and I think food insecurity, travel insecurity, these students, I open up my house early because students leave at 5 a.m. to ride a bus to get to campus, and they have nowhere to go. So my house is open up early to come and hang out so that when they have their bus at 6 o'clock at night, they can hop on the bus and leave. So, it's lots of little things and support systems that you can put in place that make big impacts on students.
Thank you, Dan. I feel really fortunate that I have had the opportunity to visit your house and meet some of your students. And I know that it's a place where they feel supported and cared for and can learn, which is a priority. And thank you for mentioning food security efforts. Of course, Swipe Out Hunger, that's something that we're very concerned about, and that's our focus of making sure that we're meeting the food security needs of students on campuses. And seeing your pantry and what you're doing there was great. This is to anyone. What do you think are the pieces that need to be in place to ensure we're reaching first generation students? For most of the folks that are joining us today, they're going to be folks running food pantries or other meal programs. How do we reach first generation students?
Well, I think Dan absolutely has the right idea by creating a community in a physical space. That's amazing. Also, just whether it's a physical space or not, being very deliberate in creating community. So whether it's peer mentoring, faculty advising, just like Dan said, a lot of students feel that there's a shame factor in asking for help. Little do they know that the folks at the top have been asking for help and getting help for a long, long time. And so making a venue for people to be able to pursue that support. Making sure you're providing equitable paths even to opportunity outside of the campus. So for instance, if students need to earn money as part of their financial aid package, why not steer them towards partnerships where they're going to get substantive work experience that'll help them in their career versus just working in the cafeteria, and getting them guidance in that regard. So those are just some of the things I would put out there.
I also think it's important to consider that not only these support offerings and services exist, but ensuring that you're creating an intentional connection with the students. So Dan, you've obviously done an incredible job of creating community, but ensuring that the students recognize all the services that they have access to. And if you ask them, they probably tell you this, 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 and this. But if we assume that just because we create an experience that students will inherently access them, that's false. We have to consider the ways that our students are receiving information and going to those places. Maybe it's TikTok, maybe it's a different social media platform. It's likely not their email inbox. So those 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 unread emails will remain unread. And so being really thoughtful about the ways our students are receiving and consuming information and going to those platforms and having your own presence there, a presence that feels authentic to you, right? This is not telling you how to engage on TikTok or telling you to engage on TikTok. It must feel authentic to your efforts, but it is important to consider where students are receiving information to ensure that they recognize how they would benefit from those programs and services and understand how to then utilize them. I think that's a really important aspect, and I'll pass it over to Dan because I feel like I've teed you up.
No. I love that you said that because I've had to bring in students to handle my social media because I'm terrible at social media. But we also developed a peer mentoring program through my Title V grant. And it's been working out where if I go up to the students like, hey, come do this mentoring, and they're like, okay, I'll be there. But when another student goes and tells them like, hey, I have this great thing that's going on in this office, they immediately flock to that office and then it spreads like wildfire. So I let the students, my student workers, run our Instagram and our social media because they do it in a lot more attractive way than me just posting some random flyer. But also just having them go out onto campus, be a part of groups. And one of the things I'm pushing right now is that we need to start a first generation club on campus, just so that because I have my 250 students, but I'm sure there's in a 4,000 student campus, there's probably another 1,500 to 1,000 that are first gen that just don't identify or don't want to identify, or they don't know that we have these things. And so being able to get students to promote for you and bring them in and feel welcoming is huge on campus. I mean, we have a relatively small campus, so it's easy for these students to get out there. But forming these clubs and organizations are a big deal.
Absolutely. Thanks, Stan. I kind of want to hear from Cassie. As a student yourself, what do you think works well with reaching students on campuses? And I know you facilitate a lot of programs yourself. So tell us what's working well, what we could do better.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to follow Dan with all he said about that. Like, yeah, creating community is, I think, key, right? I remember when I first started, so I lived a solid probably 30, 45 minutes from campus, way out in the middle of nowhere, which doesn't seem like that far, but when you have to share transportation, it can be really difficult. So a lot of times, I would be on campus from sunrise to sunset while my family was using the car, and I talked to one of my instructors about, just feeling isolated, feeling lonely. And I remember her saying, "Well, I have this lounge in this office that nobody's using. Anytime you want to come in, it's got a fridge, it's got a couch, it's yours to use." And that eventually turned into our honor student lounge. And we knew that, we could go there whenever. The door was always unlocked. And we could always find community with the people that were hanging out and studying there. And that just made me feel welcome and seen. And I think that's really the key, is making sure your students feel seen, making sure they feel heard. I think a lot of colleges can be like, "Oh, we're doing creative outreach. We're trying to reach these students." And it's like, yeah, but you're using the same outreach that you've used for years that has never worked, which is spamming people's emails. Like, are you going to these workforces and holding college fairs? Are you talking to, the places students hang out? If somebody had tried to host like a first gen student education session or like welcome, I wouldn't have gone because I didn't know that I was first gen. I didn't know what that term meant. I just knew that I was the first in my family to go to college. So I think making sure that you have first gen students informing the work that you do too is also really crucial.
Thank you, Cassie. I actually saw a question in our chat. Dan, I'm going to throw it back to you there for a second. Curiosity around student workers that you work with, are they also first generation students?
Yes, all the students that I bring in are work study students are students in my program as well. So they're first gen, they're Pell recipients. I used to work at Upper Bound for a TRIO Upper Bound program. And so when I moved over from the program to St. Thomas, 3 of my students graduated and immediately came to St. Thomas with me because of the influence and because they knew they were supported by me. I've known these students since they were freshmen in high school, so it was a safe space. But they came with me and they know what it's like to struggle. And one of my motifs that I use is mirrors versus windows. It's like anyone that I bring onto campus, I want my students to see themselves in them and not see them through a window and wish they could be like them. So all of the executives I bring on to speak, they're all people of color that were first generation students that have gone through the struggle and have made it, because those are the ones that I want to influence these students to say, hey, I could do this too. If they can do it, I could do it too. So we do a lot of that on campus, but I purposely hire students. My staff were all first generation students. Ironically, some of my staff were people that were my students 15 years ago. And they've made it. They were in my Upper Bound program, and they've reached out 10, 15 years later. It's like, hey, do you have any openings? I work in higher education, and I bring them on board because if they can relate with the students, they could better serve the students. And so I strategically do all my hiring and everything I do so that the students can see themselves in them and know they can get there.
Mirrors versus windows. You got me with that one, Dan. Thank you so much. We're getting a lot of love for Trio in the chat and in the emojis, which I know we're all glad to see that. I want to highlight your comment in the chat, but also there's some folks adding to it about the minimum age of first gen students that a lot of us are working with. We want to keep in mind that a lot of our students aren't students fresh out of high school, but later in life. are there any specific tools that can be utilized to reach those students beyond what we've discussed already?
I mean, I'm happy to let Dan or even others who are participating remotely give their expertise, but things that are practical. So again, if there's food insecurity, you've created a food pantry in the garage of the facility where they're socializing. Childcare, huge issue. Transportation vouchers. I'm very proud to say, and Dina, I think you're part of this as well. There's a new organization called the First Gen Fund, where they provide, they're nominal, maybe $1,000, but just cash scholarships to help students cover emergency needs, because a car breaking down can be the difference between you finishing the semester or not. So really addressing a lot of the practical concerns that students have. Of course, the social emotional, absolutely, but there are a lot of real practical things too that will make a huge difference on whether or not people get to the finish line.
Thank you very much. And thanks for all the insight that y'all have offered so far. We're getting to that point in today's call where we want to open up the floor to any questions from the greater audience. Feel free to raise your hand. I'm happy to add you to our windows of chat here, or drop the questions in the chat, the Q&A. Don't be shy if you have anything that you'd like to add or want to make sure you get to ask today. We want to give you the opportunity to do that. And while we wait to see if any additional questions come in, want to ask all of y'all, as we look to the future, what changes or improvements do you think we'd like to see for how we support students on campus?
I'll offer an example that we're seeing out of the state of Colorado, and recognizing that the representation of first-gen students is only going to continue to grow. And so it's important, this conversation is so important for the ways that COE, Dan and Cassie, and through Kim's efforts at COE and all the examples offered, that we are taking responsibility as folks within higher education to understand the representation of first-gen students and to align intentional offerings. Out of the state of Colorado, a bill, the House Bill 1082, which was sponsored by Rick Taggart, Javier Membre, Janice, Rich, James, Coleman, and it established the first generation serving institution designation for institutions across the state. We're going to see more of this, which is a good thing. And as state by state, you see these types of bills passing, you will continue to see institutions taking that responsibility by first securing the designation and then aligning their support offerings for first-gen students. So for me, this is optimism. This is folks across higher education taking responsibility and demonstrating what that looks like. And so I'm looking forward to more states following in Colorado's footsteps, and being able to work alongside them, especially their institutions, to promote first generation student success.
Wow, Dina, what a great example. Thank you for that. We have a question in the chat. When meeting the students where they are, how do we get them to participate in or get them to see the benefit of participating in a program like TRIO?
I think, generally speaking, your current students are going to be your best advertisers and promoters, but also your alumni. And beyond your program alumni, I have to do a little bragging here. We every year award something called the National TRIO Achiever Award, for outstanding alumni of our program. And if you take a look, I mean, these are the people who've been where these students are now, and they're now attorneys general, they're college presidents, they're award-winning journalists, and even just in your own community, it's the school teacher, it's the principal, it's the banker down the road. And so having those positive role models, and again, that peer support, I think more than not, I've heard people say, oh, I joined TRIO because my friends, I could get pizza during study hall or whatever. I mean, sometimes that's how it starts, but that peer connection, and the extras, and it's free. The government pays, this is federally government funded. So that to me is the best way to get students involved.
Food is the ultimate motivator. The other thing, when I used to work with Upper Bound doing recruitment, I used to take some of my Upper Bound alumni to the classrooms and talk to students, just to see that this is not just a program to be a part of, but this is shaping your future. This is going to be your passageway to college and beyond. And so, but like I said before, hearing it from me, you know, when they hear it from Mr. Garcia all the time, it seems to go in one ear and goes out the other. But when they hear it from their peers, it attracts them. Then they get to hang out with their friends, but they're hanging out with their friends without a lot of knowledge that they're actually helping themselves along the way.
Incredible. Well, thank you all. We're right here at the end and we're going to close out with a few. I know time went fast. Y'all moved us through that conversation beautifully. Thank you for all the insights that you shared, resources. I'm sure that there may be some follow-up and we'll connect y'all as needed. But thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. And we're grateful to have you. If you want to react now with the round of applause, this would be a perfect time to do that. See, I see them all coming through now. Thank y'all so much. And now y'all have been hearing from Sage McCoy all chat. She's been answering some of our great questions that have been coming across, but I'm actually going to have her join us because she has been doing some incredible work on creating a new resource for the network. And I want to make sure that we're able to share that today. Sage?
Hello. Hi everyone. I don't know how to turn on my camera in a webinar, but hello. I'm Sage McCoy. I'm our Student Education and Engagement Manager here at Swipe Out Hunger. And yes, I've been working on creating a guide. There's a lot of really good information in here about a lot of what we've talked about today. Some tips and tricks for getting first-gen students engaged with your anti-hunger program. And so I'm going to throw the link in the chat, and we will also be sharing it out in follow-up emails. But I hope that you all enjoy. It'll be a good reference if you don't want to rewatch the whole webinar. There's a lot of good stats, a lot of good information. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sage. You're amazing. And we're so glad to have this available to the network. Like Sage mentioned, the link's in the chat, but it will also be available in the follow-up email from today's call. Want to also throw out for the students who are joining us on this call today, some resources and opportunities that will be available to you. We are currently in the process of collecting data about our students with the student survey. If you haven't participated in that yet, please do. There's an opportunity to earn gift cards, some different things like that by completing that. Also, we have student office hours that Sage wonderfully hosts for our students once a month on a Friday. You're able to sign up for that. And we have a student newsletter and then, of course, student swipe chapters. So those students on the call today that are heavily involved with food security efforts on your campus, highly encourage y'all to join the efforts with the swipe chapters that Sage helps facilitate. And I see that Sage dropped the link, but swipehunger.org/students is our student webpage where you can access all of these resources. Coming up on the end here, chat's been amazing. Y'all have brought so many good insights, great questions, and I've also seen a lot of questions and insights specific to food security and pantry resources. We want to keep that conversation going. So if you have not joined us on Slack yet, please do. There's been already some exciting conversations this week that you can jump on in with, but we can also continue the conversations. Specifically here, I see about inventory, getting some items for your pantry and partnering with food banks. We can share those resources more with each other in that space. We'd also love your feedback on how today's call went for you. So feel free to get out your phones and utilize that QR code, or we're going to drop a link in the chat here in a second. It's a quick little feedback survey, helps us a lot, and also helps us drive the content that we'll provide y'all in the future. And then last thing we want to make sure you're aware of is that we have one more swipe session in this calendar year. It's going to be on December 10th. You can RSVP now, and we'll be talking about scalable fundraising. So fundraising ideas that you can tackle on your campus that will help with the efforts that you have going there. And that's all from Swipe today. Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate the time and energy that you shared. And we'll all stay on the call for a little bit longer